beautiful souls. My name is Carolyn and I'm abnormal and I like to talk about abnormal things. This channel is all about true crime and anything abnormal. So if you're interested, definitely recommend subscribing if you'd like to see more from me. And if you're enjoying the video, please give it a like. So let's get right into the story. So let me set the scene. We're in Johnson, Indiana in the early 90s and satanic panic is everywhere. So the police in the county start noticing a lot of vandalism, and this vandalism was all different kinds of satanic symbols. And there's also COS painted everywhere, which stands for the Church of Satan. And police thinks this is just kids like vandalizing, acting silly. They don't really take it too serious. It's just kind of like an annoyance to them that there's all this vandalism and they'll have it cleaned up and then it comes back and it's just an endless cycle, and they don't take any of it serious. They just think it's, teenagers being teenagers, doing what teenagers do. And a lot of the local teens listen to heavy metal. So back in the early 90s, I was very young back then, but like there was all this satanic panic. They thought like there was just like Satan was like possessing all these people, and if you listen to heavy metal you had to be evil, and it was a lot of nonsense and propaganda. But in this story, it's true. So the first person we're going to talk about is Mark Goodwin. And in 7th grade, Mark was asked to write a essay for school about the meaning of Halloween, and this was right up his alley. He was not that into school, but this assignment to write about the meaning of Halloween excited him immensely. So Mark decided he was going to do some research. He headed out to the library and he found the Satanic Bible. He also checked out other books that were about black magic, the occult, anything to do with Satanism. He just checked out a whole lot of these books and he dove head first into them. So then he decided, this Satanist stuff, I like it. I want to do more of it. I know what, I'll start a satanic cult. So that's exactly what he did. And they were called Satan's Disciples. So when he started this cult, Satan's Disciples, there were 6 members. These were members specifically chosen by Mark Goodwin. And to be part of this cult, obviously you had to be a Satanist or be super into Satan or want to learn more about Satan, but you needed to commit. Like, he wanted people who were willing to commit to Satan. And he was able to find 5 other people, so there were 6 of them. So at the beginning of the cult, it was pretty harmless. They would get together and read from the Satanic Bible, and they would like chant. They all get together and walk around the graveyard at night and like talk about Satan and how cool he was and how much, they wanted to be like Satan. And that was pretty much the vibe. It seemed pretty harmless. I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone who went to high school had a bunch of kids who wanted to be into Satan and used to go hang out in the graveyard, and it was completely harmless. But in this case, it gets not so harmless. It gets absolutely disturbingly evil, because soon this story is going to take a big twist. So most of these kids, they joined this just because they wanted to rebel against their parents, and they thought like, hey, if I say I'm a Satanist, my parents are going to freak out. But really, it was just an excuse to like hang out, drink alcohol, smoke a little of the devil's lettuce. But to Goodwin, he took this super serious. This was his life. This encompassed every part of his personality, every choice he made. Like, he was hardcore committed to Satan. So he was super committed to this. He did not partake in any of the alcohol or little smoke. No, he stayed sober and he wore a dark black robe. And then he decided that he would start sacrificing animals for Satan. And when he would do this, he would drain the blood and drink it. And I think if you're at the point you're drinking blood, you are pretty committed at this point. And then they would all listen to music, and they liked to dance around as though they were possessed. They liked to pretend that they were like possessed, and they would like flail around like, oh, Satan. And yeah, they were teens having a good time. And then rumors started that they were participating in orgies. Now, at this point in the story, I haven't heard of any girls being in this cult, but apparently they would participate in orgies with each other, and I think sometimes they would like sneak some girls in and be like, hey, you want to come to the cemetery and like, be part of Satan, and like we'll all just have orgies. And yeah, so there were a bunch of kids having orgies in a graveyard. But Mark Goodwin had his limits at this point. He loses his limits later, but at this point he had limits. And when someone in the cult suggested sacrificing a baby, Mark Goodwin decided to walk away. So even though he had left the cult, his obsession with Satanism did not stop. He just didn't practice it with anyone else. He would, chant and have little ceremonies and rituals, and he would just do it all on his own. He just didn't participate with the group, but he just continued the same things he was doing. He just kind of did it on his own until he turned 18 and he started working at a fast food restaurant. And at the fast food restaurant, he met Keith and David Lawrence, who were two brothers, and they were down with the sickness. They were all right into Satan, just like he was, and the trio would come together and it would lead to deadly results. So you've got Mark Goodwin, he's 18. Then you have Keith Lawrence, he's 18. He is the younger brother. The older brother, he's 21, that's David Lawrence. But of the two brothers, the younger brother was the dominant brother. He was the one who was the boss. So Keith was the one who made all the rules, made all the decisions, and David just kind of followed along with his brother. So Mark and Keith have everything in common. They like the same music, and when they listen to this music, they listen to this music as though it is a Bible. Like, they consider the lyrics to the songs they're listening to like a Bible. They're also reading the Satanic Bible and just all kinds of books. Like, they had books on books on books. And I mean, I have books on books on books, but I do have a lot of true crime books. Am I similar to these guys? No, because I don't do the evil things, but I do like to read about them. Okay, enough about me. Let's focus on the boys, because in a few minutes, things just go really, really bad. So Keith, who is the younger brother, the dominant brother, he went through it in his life. He was bullied the entire time he was in school. And in the 7th grade, his teachers recommended he get some counseling because they were concerned that this kid, he needed some help. He was not well. But I mean, are they ever well? So his parents decided instead of getting him counseling, they would send him to a boarding school because they thought maybe this would like make things better. It didn't. So this was the 7th grade. He's sent to a boarding school, and this is when he really gets into Satanism. He gets some books on Satanism, And that is all he is interested in. Nothing else is interesting this boy. Satan is his homie. Now, the older brother, David, he wasn't intrigued by Satanism at all. None of it interested him. But the dynamic between the two brothers was the younger one dominated the older one. And David, the older one, would kind of just do whatever he was told by his brother. So he kind of got into this, not really because he had an interest in it, but basically because his brother told him to. And he liked his younger brother. He thought he was super cool and like he wanted to be like him. So he just kind of got into Satanism to make his brother happy. And at one point, Keith, the younger brother, chased David around the house with a knife unless he was willing to commit to being a Satanist. So at this point, David was like, okay, I guess I'm in. So Mark Goodwin, who's the guy we talked about at the beginning, and Keith Lawrence, who's the younger brother, they have so much in common. And I'll just let you know, I was trying to find pictures to put in of these guys because obviously the video is always better if I can add pictures. All I could find, I'll insert it, but it was just like a picture of a newspaper article and it's all blurry and you can't really see what the hell they look like. But just so you know, I couldn't find many pictures of these guys. I tried, but no. Maybe Satan took all their pictures. Ooh. So Mark and Keith, they're inseparable. They are besties in Satan. They are inseparable. They're together all the time. They talk about Satan and they're like so cool because they're like into Satan. And they decide to write up a 20-year contract to Satan. They tell Satan, we'll commit the next 20 years of our lives to you. Now, my question is, if you're so committed to Satan, why are you only committing 20 years? Like, basically, they would be around 40, and then, like, you're no longer committed to Satan at that point. I don't know. I feel like if you're super committed, you probably commit your whole life. But no, they decide 20 years, that's the golden number. And then they decide after the 20 years, Satan can do whatever he wants to them. Satan can kill them. Now, as you'll notice, the name of this video is The Carnival Cults, because guess what the boys do? They join a carnival and become carnies. So the two brothers, they had worked for a carnival before in the Bahamas, and this was before they all met at like the fast food joint. And then they decide like the carny life is the life for them. They want to do carny all the time. So they join this carnival that's like going around Indiana, and they just, you know, living the carny life, you know, worshiping Satan, living their best lives. And then they meet Jimmy. And Jimmy is another carny, and he's super Satanist too. Like, Satan is the vibe for all these guys. So the four boys, they're all super excited that they're Satanists and they're super proud of this. So they just like go around to all the other people in the carnival and like talk about their rituals and their obsession with Satan and like crimes they've committed, but like pretty minor crimes, you know, nothing too intense, until someone brings up a crime that Jimmy had committed in Ohio. On August 30th, 1991, Jimmy had committed a murder. And this was not a crime he wanted anybody talking about. They had killed a young man named Andrew Wright in Ohio. They had slit his throat and thrown his body in the woods. So they decide that they're going to tell David, who is the older brother, and Mark, who is the guy that the story started about. So they confess this murder to these two guys, and they are just intrigued. And I mean, if you've got 4 people that all know about a murder, the chance of it staying silent is not likely. So eventually, one of them ends up telling one of the other carnival workers named Tony Alt about the murder. And 21-year-old Tony, he was interested in Satanism too. He had read a lot about it. He wasn't super committed like the other 4 were, but he dabbled. He dabbled in Satanism. So when these other 4 boys were telling them all about the rituals and the sacrifices and like all the Satanist shit that they did, he was really interested and he wanted to be a part of it. So the 4 boys tell Tony, like, hey, you know, the carnival closes today. So this was the last day of the carnival that they were currently working at. And they're like, you know what? We're going to go out to some old barn and we're going to have like a super satanic ritual. It's going to be super cool. You should definitely come along. And he's like, hell yeah, let's go. So Brenda Ferguson, Mark's girlfriend, gives these 5 guys a ride out to this like abandoned barn. She drops them off and they say, you know, drop us off, give us a few hours and come back and pick us up. And she's just like, cool, see ya, have fun. She had nothing to do with any of it. So the 5 men are at the barn and they start a big bonfire and they're like talking to Satan. And then they decide to like take this like old barn door off of its hinges and lay it out, and that is now their altar. So then they tell Tony, why don't you get on the altar? You know, get on the altar, lay down. Like, this is going to be really cool. Satan's going to love this. Like, hang out on the altar, dude. So at first Tony's like, okay, sure, sounds fun. Not a good choice. I don't know, if a bunch of Satanists told me to like lay on an altar while they're gonna perform a ritual on me, I'm probably not gonna go for it, to be honest with you. But Tony, he was all about it. So Tony lays down on the altar, which is just a barn door, an old barn door. It's not an altar, but to them it was. And they tie him down, and then they decide to cut him from his throat to his groin. And they cut him, but not enough that it would kill him. Like, this wasn't a deep enough cut that it would kill him. It obviously cut him and he was bleeding, but it wasn't deep enough that this was gonna end his life. And at this point, Tony's kind of freaking out. Like, what the hell are you doing? So then Tony's like, yeah, I'm not really down with this. Let me the fuck up. So they gag him so he can't speak. And they continue and they're just like chanting and like trying to invoke Satan and, you know, doing the most, all surrounding Tony, who's tied down, probably freaked the fuck out. So then Mark and the 2 brothers, so you know, they do the initial cut and then they like make it an inverted cross because hail Satan. So that was what they did. And they cut a bunch of other satanic symbols in his body. They then decide to cut off Tony's ears. And then they attempt to take out his heart while it's still beating. So they want to remove his heart while he's alive and the heart is still beating. But they have a hard time. They can't seem to like do it. I guess, you know, I'm sure it's probably not easy to remove a heart, but these boys, they couldn't do it. They couldn't get the heart out. Jimmy just whispers to Tony, are you ready to die? And that was the end of Tony's life. So from the beginning, the 4 men never had any intention of allowing Tony into their cult. Like, Tony thought he was joining this Carney cult, and no, the 4 boys had never intended for him to be part of this cult. But he would make a good sacrifice, they thought. So then they threw his head and his hands in the bonfire. Remember, they'd started this big bonfire. They chuck his head and his hands in the fire, and they think this will like stop his body from being identified or anyone figuring out who the poor guy was. And then Keith buried his head because he wanted to come back at a later time to get his skull and give it to someone as a gift. So then Brenda Ferguson, the girlfriend, she has no idea what they're doing. She thinks they just went to this barn to do their little satanic rituals, and it's just like, she has no idea what happened. So she goes and picks them up, and now they've got money because they stole Tony's wallet and he had a bunch of cash in it. So they all decided to go to Arby's. I mean, what are you going to do? Go to Arby's, apparently. And when the jobs ended, Jimmy decided to go back to his parents in Shelbyville, Indiana. And Mark and the two brothers decided they were going to go to Florida because they wanted to keep being Carnies. So they were going to head down to Florida and like do the Carnival circuit down in Florida. They all drove to Florida in Mark's van. And they had named Mark's van Rigor Mortis. 2 words, Rigor Mortis. So they get to Florida and they're like doing their thing and whatever. And then Mark Goodwin, all of a sudden guilt takes over him because he's into Satanism and he's having a good time doing all this stuff. But murder, that was a bit much for him. So he decides to call his father, who's back in Indiana, and tell him what he did. And the reason he told his father is he assumed correctly that his father would call the police, which he did. So the police decide to interview Brenda Ferguson, who's the girlfriend who dropped them off and picked them up. And she had no idea murder happened, but she was able to take the police and show them, she went on a ride with the police and she's like, that's the barn I dropped them off on. That's the barn I picked them up at. And the police find Tony's remains. So then Mark returns to Indiana and he's immediately arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder. And Jimmy was arrested as well on the same charges in Shelbyville in Indiana. And the two brothers at this point, they're back in the Bahamas. They had worked at carnivals in the Bahamas before they met Mark, before this whole Carney cult started. These two brothers had worked in the Bahamas. Now then they came back, they all met, they did the most, and then they were back in the Bahamas. So they had no idea that their two friends had been arrested or anyone knew about the murder. They had no idea about any of this. And then they came back from the Bahamas and were arrested. So the police arrest them and ship them to Indiana because they had flown back to Florida and custom agents arrested them and you're heading back to Indiana, you killed someone, now it's time to pay the price. And David Lawrence, who was the older brother and the one who was the least into this, he was the first one to express remorse and plead guilty. He was fully willing to admit that he had been there and partook in this murder. And David told the police that he was never a Satanist. He kind of just played along with his brother. He hadn't actually committed the murder. He had just been there. But he was like, I'm not really into it. I just kind of follow along. So in April 1993, David Lawrence, the older brother, was sentenced to 8 years in prison. So I'm going to read what the judge said because it seems really weird to me. And it's probably going to seem weird to you too. So he confessed to it. He's sentenced to, 8 years in prison. And then the judge says to him at sentencing, although the older of the two brothers, David Lawrence, was led and manipulated by Keith. David, in your sentence, there's a good deal of punishment, but there's also a good deal of rehabilitation. In the end, it's up to you how you deal with this. I want you to be a law-abiding citizen, a good husband, and a good father. I think you can do it. Spoiler alert, no the fuck he can't. And then it was Keith's turn. He was much more involved in the murder. He actually participated in ending poor Tony's life. And he had a long criminal history. So initially he was charged with murder and was facing 80 years. But then the defense and the prosecutor made a little deal. And his charges were dropped to conspiracy to commit murder. And his lawyer's defense was basically, he's not really a Satanist. He's not that into Satan. You know, he's interested in all kinds of religions. Like, he's not that much of a Satanist, but he's not being charged because he's a Satanist, sweetie. He's being charged because he killed someone. No one's being charged because they worship Satan. You're being charged for murder. You killed someone. Who cares if you're into Satan or not? But the defense went over the top trying to prove that he wasn't a Satanist, which really, that doesn't matter. He's not solely a Satanist. This is his defense lawyer. He's not solely a Satanist. He's into reading the Greek and Hebrew Bible. He reads the Quran. He's into all different types of religion. And again, you're not being charged because you're a Satanist. No one cares if you're a Satanist. You killed an innocent man. That's why you're being charged. I don't know why the lawyer is he just harped and harped on the fact that he's not a complete Satanist. It's just a bit of an interest. It's no one cares. And so the judge basically said, yes, he didn't inflict the fatal wound, but he was the one who carved in the inverted cross, and he was definitely down for all of this. So then Keith was sentenced to 30 years in prison and then 20 years probation for the murder. And Mark Goodwin was very remorseful. Now, whether he was actually remorseful or he decided to act really remorseful to try to reduce his sentence, I don't know. But he played the, part of Mr. Remorse. So he would, when he was awaiting sentencing and trial, he would meet with a chaplain every day, and he did a lot, just trying to make himself look innocent and extremely remorseful. And Mark Goodwin got up and apologized to Tony's family. I think he was the only one to apologize to the family. But when someone's committed a murder and then they're convicted and then they're trying to decide sentencing and they apologize to the family, I don't ever believe it. I don't ever believe them. You're standing in a courtroom in front of a judge who this is going to determine the sentence that you get. If you apologize to the family, that's going to make you look better. So whenever these killers get up in court and apologize, I'm you couldn't have been sorry before you committed the murder? You're sorry now? Now that nothing can be done to save Tony, now you're sorry? You weren't sorry at the time? And Mark Goodwin was only sentenced to 8 years in prison. So in 1994, Jimmy, who's the one who actually killed Tony, he's the one who ended his life. The other three, they were all for it, in my opinion. They were there. They knew why they were there, and they knew what was going to happen. So any idea that they weren't guilty of what had happened was, in my opinion, just nonsense. But Jimmy is the one who actually killed him. He was the one who committed the act. So Jimmy was up for the death penalty in Indiana. Then he also faced life in prison in Ohio for him killing Andrew Wright, who was the guy that Tony was told, the murder of Andrew Wright was what was told to Tony, and supposedly the reason Tony died because he knew about this murder that Jimmy had committed in Ohio. So for Jimmy to avoid the death penalty, he pled guilty. He was sentenced to 60 years, which would be served consecutively to the Ohio sentence. He was given 20 years to life, and Jimmy's still serving his time. He's still serving his time in jail. He ended up going to Ohio, and he's in jail for Ohio for the first murder. But if he finishes that time and he's still alive, he's heading to Indiana to serve his sentence in Indiana. So he's never getting out no matter what. But not everyone's still in prison. Mark Goodwin and David Lawrence, the two that were sentenced to 8 years, have both completed their sentence and they're free. And Keith Lawrence, he was sentenced to 30 years and he only served 11 of the 30 years. I don't understand that, but after 11 years, I mean, when he was in jail, he like took like college courses to like try to make himself look good. And I guess, you know, you pretend you're interested in education and all of a sudden they're like, let's just let him out of prison. Seems like a good idea. No, it's not. And also with Keith, his sentence of 30 years also included 5 years of probation. But they decided after the 11 years, they're like, yep, you're good to go. So not only didn't he have to serve the 30 years, he only served 11 of those years. He also didn't have to do the 5 years probation. They just were like, see ya, enjoy your life. And then in 2006, Keith Lawrence was arrested again, this time for public intoxication, battery, criminal confinement, which is all bad and serious. And I mean, he has participated in a murder, but guess how long of a sentence he gets for all of that? 180 days. So he did 180 days and then he's like, see ya. So the three of them, they're just walking around, free as a bird. So that was the absolutely bizarre, sad story about Tony. I hope that his family, I couldn't find out very much information about his family, but hopefully they're doing well. And I just feel bad because, yeah, Jimmy, the one who actually committed the murder, he's still in prison. But the other three who were there, and I mean, it wasn't like they just witnessed the murder. Like, they were participants. They like carved an inverted cross on him and like all these satanic symbols. Like, they were doing a lot. Keith wanted to go back and get his skull later. So I don't know. If Tony was my family member, I mean, I would be upset that those three guys are just like walking around, but that's what they're doing. So thank you so much for joining me. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like. If you'd like to see more from me, you can subscribe, turn on notifications, you know, all that jazz.